Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Casey Trees virtually today for the second in our series, Your City, Your Trees. My name is Gabrielle. I'm the Community Education Coordinator at Casey Trees. Today, we're going to spend about 20 minutes or so going over the steps to Tree ID. Our mission at Casey Trees is to restore, enhance, and protect the tree canopy of our nation's capital. We're super grateful for all of the trees that make up the urban forest of Washington, D.C. All of these trees are working together to store carbon, mitigate stormwater runoff, and improve air quality. So let's get to know the trees that are providing these ecosystem benefits for us. And here at Casey Trees, we concur with the Icelandic Forestry Service and think that hugging trees is a great thing to do while we are social distancing. So if you want to get out there and hug a tree and say thank you for sequestering carbon or thanks for improving our air quality, why not address that tree by name and say, hey, red maple, keep up the good work. Before we get into thanking our trees by name, how is it that trees get their names? Don't worry, we're not going to go back to middle school science class for too long. What sets humans aside from other species is our love to classify things, specifically all the living things on Earth. And being a living organism, humans have classified ourselves according to the following. If we zoom out, we are animals. We also have a spinal cord like frogs there and snakes. We don't lay eggs, so that makes us mammals. We then deviate from primates as we have begun to walk and stand upright and use tools, etc., etc. But of course, we don't identify humans by saying all of the categories that humans belong to. Instead, we just call humans by the Latin naming system, which uses the genus and the species. Homo sapiens. Homo being our genus, sapiens being the species. Of course, we go by our common name too, which is humans, and we usually call trees by their common names as well. So here we have the black cherry. Prunus serotina, for example. It belongs to the genus Prunus, as do all cherry trees. And then serotina tells us the species so that we know it is specifically a black cherry rather than another type of cherry. If we look back at the Casey Trees cherry tree bracket, we can see the common name of all the cherry trees written in all caps, and the Latin name is right below. Now, if we look at Yoshino cherry in the top right-hand corner, the common name refers not to the species, but to the cultivated variety, actually. So plant breeders created the Yoshino cherry by crossing two other cherry trees, which is why we see that X in the Latin naming. So again, we call trees a variety of things, and from one state to another, you might have a common name that one group of people call it, and then move over to Ohio, and people are calling a tree by another name than they say they were in DC. And so this is why we have our Latin naming system, so that when we talk about a tree in a more academic setting, we know what tree species specifically we are talking about, and people aren't doing research on the same thing. All right, so let's get into it. Tree ID. There are 6 identifying features that we can look at on a tree to determine what tree it is that we are seeing. Now, at the beginning of April, we went through trees with very distinct flowers, as the flowers can be an important identifying feature when determining what tree we are looking at. Today, we are going to go over in broad strokes the other characteristics that we can use. We'll go over each of these in greater detail in the coming weeks. Among these 6 characteristics, we can usually count on a tree to have 2 features that are so unique to that one tree that it helps us exclude all other possible contenders. As we talked about last time with flowers or even fruits, that unique feature may be seasonal, and that's why it's important to get to know a tree throughout the year. One of those special characteristics may be fleeting, and you can have a hunch about what tree you are looking at and then you can confirm when another feature reveals itself at another point in the year. We're going to begin with looking at a tree's growth form and context, or its habitat. That's what we mean when we say context. We're talking about the habitat or environment that you might find that tree growing in. And this is a feature that we can observe of the tree all year long. So let's talk about the context in which trees grow. On the right, we have a topographic map of Washington, D.C. We might expect to see the same types of trees growing along the lowland, more saturated soils of the Anacostia and Potomac River, like, say, the pawpaw tree that is there outlined in green. However, as a city, many parts of D.C. are, it's not very apparent to us whether we're in an upland or lowland environment. It's really just this neighborhood sort of feel. And when we're in neighborhoods, it often diminishes many of the natural characteristics that were there in the landscape before we had the built environment. So in neighborhoods, we want to make sure that trees are healthy and they can thrive. So regardless of the environmental context, you could see a small tree like the serviceberry that's there outlined in blue growing in all neighborhoods throughout the district, regardless of topography or soil. And being a small tree, these serviceberries are a great choice to put under power lines, and you can see them everywhere. Here at KC Trees, we only plant trees that have shown strong survivability traits, and it is not easy for a tree in an urban forest. You can go to the KC Trees website and see what urban hardy trees do well in Washington, D.C., and that link will also be provided for you in the email. While certain trees thrive under more or less sunlight, wetter or drier soil conditions, all of these trees are integral to creating a diverse urban forest. And Washington, D.C. has about 2 million trees, and KC Trees volunteers have inventoried thousands of them. If we look at the KC Trees inventory map, which is on our screen here, in the panel on the left, we can see the relative species distribution of the trees throughout our district. While there are many chunks in that pie, there aren't 2 million individual slivers. And that's because when we find an urban hardy tree that works, we plant them, and then we plant more and more of them. So if you get to know the top 10 most common trees in DC, you can really identify a huge percentage of the trees that make up our urban forest. And hint, we tend to focus a lot of attention on these very common trees, and we'll probably feature them in our later videos to come. So moving on from context to growth form. The growth and development of a tree is the result of the interaction between its genetic potential and the surrounding environmental conditions. Obviously, a tree that is growing around power lines may not be exhibiting its true genetic potential and is heavily influenced by those surrounding conditions. Some trees naturally want to grow with one branch that reaches straight upwards towards the sky, and we call this excurrent form. Other trees have lots of branches that reach both up and out, and we call this decurrent form. As you go on your social distancing walks, start making a note of whether a tree looks like it is exhibiting an excurrent or decurrent tendency. We'll go into excurrent and decurrent form more in the next video. All right, moving on to leaves. In our area, we see all these 3 types of leaves: the broadleaf leaf, the scale of the arborvitae, and the needle leaf, as we see with the eastern white pine. Now, trees fall into 2 categories. We have evergreens and we have deciduous trees. Deciduous trees go through the process of seasonal leaf drop, while evergreen trees don't drop their leaves during a particular season, but rather all throughout the year. For deciduous trees, leaf drop occurs before the cold weather to prevent the tree from drying out during the winter months, when the air is much less saturated with moisture. Just as we tend to get dry skin in the winter from all the surface area of our skin, that broadleaf we see for the red maple has lots of surface area, which would expose the tree to drying out. Evergreen leaves, like the arborvitae and the eastern white pine, have leaves with much smaller surface area. We describe the leaves of the arborvitae as scale-like. If you were to look closely, you would see layers of very small leaves on top of each other, creating that scale-like pattern, whereas pines have leaves that are described as needles. In our area, we have more deciduous trees than evergreens, so we dedicate most of our attention on the features that identify deciduous tree leaves. Now, of course, with everything in life, there is always an exception to the rule. And some exceptions we might see are that there are some broadleaf evergreens, like the southern magnolia or the holly, and then there are some deciduous trees that have needle-like leaves, like the cypress and the dawn redwood. But let's push those exceptions aside and talk about leaf shape, particularly deciduous tree leaf shape. So one of the most apparent features we can use to describe leaves is their shape. And especially when you have a tree that has such unique shapes as the one on the screen. You have the eastern redbud with that cute heart-shaped leaf there. We have the star or palm-shaped leaf of the sweet gum, and then that fan-shaped leaf of the ginkgo. You won't find any other tree in this area with leaves quite like this. Not even in this area, but there are no other trees with leaves quite like this. These leaf shapes are giveaways that you are looking at a redbud, sweet gum, or ginkgo. But then there are lots of leaves that look like ovals or nuanced ovals. And so then we need to look at some other features, and we will cover the vocabulary for leaves and how we tell many of these oval leaves apart in our webinars to come. Next, branches, thinking about the arrangement and the attachment. So let's think about how leaves are attached to the tree. They are attached through the branches, and how leaves are attached and arranged on that branch are very important clues in tree ID. Trivia question: how many leaves are on this slide? That's right, we have 2 leaves. On the left, we have a simple leaf, and on the right, we have a compound leaf with 7 leaflets. The rule for distinguishing is to look for the bud. Buds will always be at the base of the leaf, and since we do not see buds at the nodes that are located on that compound leaf, that indicates to us that they are leaflets. So sometimes when you first look at a tree, it can be hard to tell, and you really have to take a closer look. So what do we find? When we zoom in, we see that there are buds at the base of each of those leaves, telling us that it is a simple leaf. Here, what do we notice? Yes, we only see that bud at the very bottom of that leaf stem, or what is known as the petiole, and those 5 leaflets that are arranged like a star, those are leaflets because we do not see a bud at the base of each of those. And this is the compound leaf of a horse chestnut, which sometimes goes by the common name of a buckeye. Next, let's look at leaf arrangement. So here we have alternate leaf arrangement, where we have the bud or the leaf coming out at alternating spots along that branch. This is a common arrangement seen in many species, like the 2 that are shown here. We have the American elm and the eastern redbud. And sometimes that alternate arrangement causes this exaggerated zigzagging look to the twig. In contrast to alternate arrangement, there is opposite arrangement. Here, the leaves or the buds are arranged right across from one another on the stem. And this is a much less common style of arrangement. And because of that, we have a mnemonic that we use to remember the 4 common trees in our area that have opposite leaf arrangement. They are maple, ash, dogwood, and horse chestnut. So we can remember these 4 oppositely arranged trees as mad horse: maple, ash, dogwood, and horse chestnut. Does this look familiar? We have that horse chestnut again, and we can see that those leaves are oppositely arranged from each other. Next, let's talk about bark. As with twigs, it is really easy to see bark as this nondescript brown mass. But actually, if you look closely, there's great variety amongst bark, and I'm so excited to talk more about the ways bark can be an identifying feature and the nuances of it. But for today, we're just going to compare young and old bark, because it's important to remember that bark changes with age. So let me know which picture you think is the young red maple and which one is the mature red maple. Yes, we have the young red maple on the left and the mature red maple on the right. Flowers. So remember our 5 early blossoming trees that we covered at the beginning of April? In a few weeks, we will go over the morphology of tree flowers in much greater detail, as the form and function of flowers are not only important for the tree's reproduction, but they also serve as an important source of food for pollinators. And of course, when those tree flowers are pollinated, we get tree fruits. And all of that diversity in flowers leads to a great diversity in fruits. This slide here shows all the many different fruit types that you might see in your neighborhood within Washington, D.C. We will go over how flower structure influences the fruit form that we see, from pine cones to acorns to nuts to fleshy fruits and winged fruits. We get to see it all in our area. So let's recap the steps for tree ID. First, we want to observe the form, context, and habitat. We're in a park setting, so we can't really go based on along a riverbank or something. Our natural features have been removed from this built environment playground space. And then if we look at the form, does it exhibit X-current or D-current features? Here I see D-current features, as we have many branches growing both up and out, creating a wider crown. Next, we observe leaf shape. So nothing too specific about this one, not really unique in the way the sweet gum or ginkgo leaf is. So next we'll move on to arrangement and attachment. If we zoom in closer, we can see that we have alternate arrangement. Those buds are not located opposite one another, so that tells us that we are not looking at a maple, ash, dogwood, or horse chestnut, since we do not have opposite arrangement. So next we're going to observe flowers, fruits, and or bark to try and find another very unique characteristic. And here we have these flowers which most Washingtonians are probably very familiar with. We have cherry flowers, yes. But we also have another feature that is unique but a bit more understated, and that is the bark. On the bark of a cherry tree, you will see those orange bumps along it, which are called lenticels. And those are actually places for gas exchange to take place along the trunk of the tree. You don't see these orange bumps, lenticels, on any other tree species in this area. So the lenticels are an identifying feature on the bark that allows us to identify trees year-round, not just when we see the flowers. And then we want to make sure that our characteristics check out. Whatever tree ID guide we are using, or maybe we're using the iNaturalist app or checking the Casey Trees website, are all of these features in agreement with each other to let us know that this is a type of cherry tree. So those are the steps to tree ID. In the coming weeks, we will go through each of those identifying features in greater detail. Let us know what trees you see on your block or in your neighborhood and how your tree ID journey is going. We can't wait to hear about it and look forward to connecting with you guys in the coming weeks.